things.
As is so often, it's always the younger generation, I think, that takes that innovation and builds off the shoulders of the past.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm very pleased to have my good friend, an old friend and dear expedition member, Philippe Cousteau, and his lovely wife, Ashlan Cousteau. Philippe and you and I met, I always like try to count back now, it's 20 years.
20 years.
20 years ago, maybe a little longer, yeah.
20?
Yeah,
It's been 20?
I was 18, so I'm 38 now, so it was 20 years ago this year.
Yeah, you were a young whippersnapper, and I remember you walking down the front steps of Teddy Tucker's house in Bermuda.
That's right.
And you had those long French flippers. Remember that? Big, beautiful. I recognize those as the French style. And we went out and dove with shipwrecks around Bermuda together, and forged the beginning of a relationship that has lasted to this day and will go on for many, many decades to come. And Philippe, I've just really enjoyed watching your career over these decades. Very proud of what you've done. Carrying forward the legacy of your family, but also creating your own legacy. And you've done a really good job at it. You've carved out a niche that we very much need in this society. And Ashlan, it's been such a great pleasure meeting you through Philippe, and I see the two of you as such a team. But you bring this enormous pillar of your own from your background in journalism. So I see the two of you as real stars, not rising stars. You are stars in our ocean community, and I thank you for all the work that you do. So the idea behind this is really for us to have a conversation, and I want to talk to you, and I'd like to be a conversation between us, but also share with our listeners some our insights about the ocean and perhaps places that our listeners can go to. And, you know, I'd like to start off with a quote of your grandfather. And, you know, I'm a tremendous fan of your grandfather. The reason I've had a career in the oceans is because of him. I grew up outside of Boston in a rural area, not close to the ocean. And I used to count the days between those Jaques Cousteau documentaries on TV. They were always Sunday nights. And when they came around, you know, I'd get my mask and flippers out and sit there on the living room floor and watch that show. And that led me to my career in oceanography. So I'd like to start off to honor you and Ashlan and your grandfather with one of his many quotes. He was a very quotable man. And this one is, "The sea, once it casts its spell, holds one in its net of wonder forever."
It's one of my favorites.
Is it one of your favorites?
It is one of my favorites, and as you said, of so many of his, but that is a particularly, I think, poignant one.
Yeah, you know, the ocean, it does have that hook, doesn't it? You know, whether it's an Uber driver, a university history professor. By the way, I noticed you have a degree in history.
I do.
Which I didn't know until I did this. Like any good host, I did research on you, even though you're a good friend.
Good job, Greg.
I discovered a few things about you. Everybody's got this thing about the ocean. I mean, everybody. I don't think it's a rarity to find someone that goes, I don't like the ocean, or I'm not interested. And what was it? Let's start with you, Ashlan, for this one. What was it that, what was your first memory of the ocean? Or is there anything, like for me, it was, you know, watching it on TV, basically. It took years before I actually got in the ocean. But what was it for you that, was there a memory or one or two things that you remember about it that got you going? Or?
I mean, for me, I've always been a water baby. So my parents would joke that even after it rained and there was a puddle, I would try to sit in it and swim in it. So I have just always been fascinated with water, with swimming, with floating. I still joke that that's my favorite thing to do on vacation is float.
Yep.
Literally just want to float. But, you know, and looking at the ocean behind us right now, I mean, it is just this amazing, vast destination where you can really find anything you want in it. If you want to find fish, you can find them, hopefully, in the future also. If you want to find emptiness, you can find it. If you want to find adventure, you can find it. And I think, you know, as humans evolved, we looked at that as with wonder, with amazement, with hope, with fear. Because even people that are afraid of the ocean are still intrigued by it.
Right, they are. I know
And,
what you mean, yeah.
you know, it's a lot of people see the ocean as a space that divides us. But I look at the ocean as a space that connects all of us. It connects every single human being on this planet.
You know, to be honest with you, that rolled off my brain and my shoulders for many years, not really thinking about it. But when there's water, there's the possibility of this miraculous process taking place where a molecule, you know, hydrogen and oxygen, can pick up another atom, carry it into an organism, and carry that nutrient to the organism's stomach where it's deposited, and then it's picked up again by water and carried someplace else. It's kind of like a mule. Water's the water molecule, if you will. It's like a mule. It carries things around. And then in our case, of course, when you add salt, presto, you've got the ocean and magic. So that's a great memory. I was the same way. You know, it was, swimming pools. Oh man, if anybody has a swimming pool, I wanted to go to their house right now. And
yeah,
in
well,
oceans.
I realized at a young age that I wanted to be a mermaid. Then I think after, you know, science class, I realized that probably wasn't a thing that would happen in my lifetime. And funny enough, the first night I met Philippe, he was giving a speech about the BP oil spill because he had just gone diving.
He did great coverage on that, yeah.
It was incredible.
You won an award. Didn't you get an Emmy for that or something?
Not an Emmy, but we won a National Headliner Award, which is another journalist award here. And then we... but I worked with lots of different networks on it, and it was pretty.
Yeah, thank you for that, and congratulations on the award. Yeah.
And I think it was so important. And when I met Philippe that night, as silly as it may sound, I thought to myself, I might actually be able to be a mermaid with this guy.
That's true. This is the closest you get, right?
If I learn how to scuba dive, I could be a mermaid. And if for some reason we ever end up having a child, it might have gills. Yeah. This might actually work out for me. Sorry to put you on the spot, babe.
No, I like that story. I was in.
But I think because of that and my journalistic background, once I started, you know, Philippe and I really started getting serious and dating, and I started getting more entrenched into the work that he was doing, specifically in our oceans and educating youth, you know, that's when I realized, okay, I can use my skill set and I can reach back into everything that I've learned being on an entertainment show, and I can make these things interesting. I can make them fun. And when we can make science and make learning fun, that's when people get excited. And if we can reach out to not just the converted when we talk about these things, and by converted, I mean many of the people listening to this podcast, you know, the people that know that our oceans are in trouble, the people that know that our environment is facing huge uphill battles. But I want to talk to the people that don't necessarily seek that out. I want to talk to the people that go home every night and watch The Bachelor. I want to talk to the people that, you know, buy their clothes at fast fashion retailers. You know, those are the people that I want to talk to, because those are the people that can make a big difference in our planet. They have the power.
Well, I think the cross step that you did in your career from really very high level mainstream entertainment journalism, TV journalism, into the environmental space, it gives you special ability, and we need that. You know, we have people that have done the same thing their whole lives, and while there's a lot of value in that. And we are live from the coast of California here, outside.
PCH is right there.
PCH is right here. We're at the intersection of Sunset Boulevard and PCH, and to that motorcycle. The cross-stepping, I think, really adds strength to the message. And I find more and more in my work and in my life that people that are lateral thinkers, that can connect from one subject area to another and to another to another, are the ones that really can make the change. It's like the Renaissance. We're in a Renaissance now. I call it the ocean Renaissance. And we need people like yourself, journalists, to come, bring your history, bring your diverse background, and let's apply it to the ocean. And in your case, very romantic story. So you saw him up on the stage, and you must have thought he was cute, huh?
Oh, he was totally cute. I was not planning on spending the whole evening at the speech. We were just going to go say hello and wave and leave. And when Philippe walked in, our eyes met, and I thought, wow, the guy on the poster looked really dorky. This guy is really cute.
So the photo on the poster was of me in Louisiana on the beaches with mud and oil everywhere, and I had
mandals.
Yes, because I was in the water.
Sandals.
I was in the water. So I had some waterproof sandals on, and so in my defense, it was very the wardrobe was appropriate for where I was.
Yes, I was just being very judgy.
She was.
And I will fully admit that. I was being very judgy, and I was expecting a, you know, kind of dorky gentleman to walk through the door, and instead Ryan Gosling walked in, and I was like, AKA Philippe's twin, and I was like, oh my gosh, that guy's cute. And we just hit it off. And that was it.
Well, I think the fire in your relationship is evidenced in your work and the work you do on TV, bringing people stories about the ocean. It's all about storytelling.
All about storytelling.
It is, and it always has been. You know, and I should say just what a thrill it is here to spend some time with you, Greg, on this, and an honor to be part of this inaugural podcast. But you know, it's been such a pleasure in my life. And actually, I was just thinking about it. I think it was 16 actually, so it was 22 years ago that we first met.
I think you were 16. I was going to
16,
say,
right?
yeah, you were a young fella. Yeah.
And what an influence that had on me. You know, my grandfather Jaques Cousteau was an incredible man, and he passed away when I was about 17 years old. So I did know him pretty well. Saw him a few times a year, but he was older by the time I was in my teens and wasn't really going on an expedition. So I didn't grow up on Calypso like a lot of people assume, you know, his famous ship. I wasn't on expedition since I could walk because my father, Philippe Sr., passed away 6 months before I was born. And so that part of my legacy of exploration and the oceans, etc., was one that I saw on television, and I watched the movies and I read the books that they did, but I never really got to have a hands-on experience until I was 16, and my mother said, listen, there are a couple people. One of them was Dr. Eugenie Clark, an incredible, you know, pioneer in oceanography, and a dear friend of yours I know.
Yep.
And she's leading an expedition to Papua New Guinea. Would you like to go? And I said, absolutely. And so I had this amazing adventure with Jeannie and diving and doing research for weeks out in Papua New Guinea in the middle of nowhere. And then she said, another place I want you to go is visit with our dear friends, the Tuckers, who were good friends of my mother and father when they spent a couple months in Bermuda filming back 30, 40 years ago. And that Peter Benchley and Greg Stone are going to be there, and these are incredible people, and this is another part of your opportunity to at least start to experience a little bit of your legacy.
And Joe McGinnis.
And Joe McGinnis was there as well,
Yeah,
actually. He
yeah.
was good friends with my father.
Yeah.
And so that trip to Bermuda was really formative for me, and in terms of launching me on this path and helping me to realize, while I grew up fascinated by the oceans and adventure and expeditions, the idea of them, I had never really experienced them. And experiencing them with you, Greg, and with Jeannie in Papua New Guinea is, and George Buckley from Harvard on the third trip was down to Bonaire.
Oh, yeah, George, yeah.
Were really formative for me and launched me on my career. So it's fun to listen to you talk about how you watched shows of my grandfather, and that really launched you in that. And while those shows did for me, it was the hands-on experience I had and the kindness and warmth from you and Teddy and everybody that really welcomed and embraced me into this kind of world of exploration that inspired me. So it's a thrill to be here today.
Well, that's really, really very nice to hear that, Philippe. And I do remember that expedition vividly, and you know, because, you know, let's face it, your name preceded you, right? You know, Cousteau is it's the gold standard in oceans for all of us. And Teddy Tucker, who I always want to honor whenever I hear his name, was my greatest mentor.
Terrific
and
guy.
Took me from a very inexperienced teenager to the ocean. He really was a very important driver in my life, and he was close to your father. I think from that time.
Yeah.
And I remember on that trip in Bermuda when I first met you, I was on the boat down at the end of the dock with Teddy.
Yep.
And then this young guy comes walking down with those long flippers I mentioned earlier. And I remember Teddy.
Gawky, like you don't have to be nice, like a lanky, gawky
You were.
kid.
Is this when you had the ponytail or no
You were
ponytail?
No, this is pre-ponytail.
Okay, pre-ponytail.
You were very humble and understated, and just a really great guy, sweet guy. You really were. You know, because I didn't know what to expect, actually. And you came down, I remember Teddy bellowed out like he used to talk, and he said, oh, look at you, you look just like your dad. Do you remember that?
He was a lanky, yes I do.
Yeah.
He was, because my dad was tall and skinny, and so was my grandfather, so yeah, that runs in the family.
And we went out, and you were, what I liked about you is you were taking it all in. You weren't saying a lot. you were drinking it in, because you were hanging out with your dad's friends, you know. And I didn't know your dad. Unfortunately, I would have liked to. I was sort of a kind of a half a generation back from him. But Teddy and Joe and those guys, and I could see a transfer of something special on that trip. You know, people that were close to your father, and you didn't know your dad because of the circumstances around that. But I felt a transfer happening. I don't know, was that happening there? It was
Absolutely.
It was like your debutante. You were coming out. It was your coming out party.
That was was a huge influence on me, and just seeing this group of guys who were jovial and friendly and so nice and so smart and accomplished in their own right, and just seeing what that experience was like, and imagining that's what my father experienced for all those decades, and why he fell in love with the adventure and with oceans and with exploration, and I caught the bug.
The apple doesn't fall far, because that group does not suffer fools, right? You have to hit a certain standard to get in, and you were right in. You just had the right bounce, the right attitude. And then I recall maybe the next year, the year after, I asked you to come to the New England Aquarium to give a talk. This big fundraising gala thing at the New England Aquarium in Boston. Something I would have been nervous speaking in front of. And here's a guy who hadn't spoken much. And with your name comes expectations.
Yep, it does.
And that's a tough part of it too. Well, you stood up there, man. You had that audience in the palm of your hands, and you read a note. I recall a letter your father had actually written you when you were in your mother still.
I think it was a letter from my grandfather in eulogy to my father.
Okay. It was a very personal. You shared with us something very personal, and you really connected. And I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. And you really spectacular. So I was honored to see the beginning of that. And then next thing I know, I see you on CNN. You're the CNN correspondent, and you really picked up the torch and have carried it forward. And it's taken you all over the world. What can you tell us? Like, is there any place or dive that comes to mind? People ask me this all the time, so you can pick one. Doesn't have to be the one, but the most important, the scariest, the most beautiful, just something that.
Yeah, easy question to answer. Actually, the best dive I've ever participated in was in the Red Sea, on a reef called Shabrumi, which means Roman reef in Arabic, and it was the reef where my grandfather and father did Conshelf 2, which was the famous expedition and experiment where they put a habitat underwater on a reef for a month, about 60 feet. And aquanauts saturated and lived on that habitat for a full month. And it was a revolution, because nobody knew if people could survive living underwater, what were the physiological effects, etc. Yeah. And there's bits of it left.
Really?
There on Shabrumi Reef. Not the habitat, but some of this. They had a little garage for their little yellow submarine, and they had shark cages, and they had tool sheds in the water where they hide their scooters, and a shark cage down at about 150 feet or so. And I was filming a series called Oceans for the BBC that I was a co-host on, and we went diving in the ruins of Conshelf 2 on Shabrumi Reef, and then went around the corner to like this beautiful reef wall that was just covered in coral, and silky sharks, reef sharks, schooling hammerheads, massive grouper, all in one dive. And I maintain to this day that if there is a Garden of Eden on Earth, it is a Red Sea coral reef, Greg. And all these years later, I'm now working on a project actually in Saudi Arabia, also on coral in the Red Sea. And incidentally, it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't appreciate that it was 75 years ago this year that my grandfather co-invented with an engineer named Émile Gagnon the aqualung, or scuba diving.
When's the anniversary?
This year is the 75th anniversary.
Okay.
And that's a lifetime that we have truly been exploring the oceans. Prior to that, it was pioneers like William Beebe, and you also had hands-on divers with the big hard helmets that clomped around on the bottom. You had that kind of technology and experimentation that was happening. But in terms of what made my grandfather's vision different was the ability to swim freely like a fish. And scuba diving provided that opportunity. And then, he jury-rigged underwater cameras, because those didn't really exist. And he, worked with, so many different, Doc Edgerton on the underwater strobes, and, out of MIT. And it was such an era of exploration. But we grew up with Nemo and with Shamu and with all these kind of images of the ocean today that we take for granted, I think, when back just a lifetime ago, no one really knew what that was. So it's been a very short period of time, and you think relatively, that human beings have been exploring the ocean and that we've learned what we've learned.
It was a real, it was an inflection. It was a turning point. It was a paradigm change, really, what your grandfather did. Because, if you look back over human history, some physical anthropologists recently found some caves in South Africa in a place called Mossel Bay. Now, sea levels are going up, we all know today, from sea level rise, from climate change, but they've fluctuated quite a bit on their own through the various ice ages. So a lot of the coastal areas have been washed clean of human habitation, but these caves were high enough because they were above the sea level rise maxima over the time. And they dug around in there and they found evidence that we were living in these caves 200,000 years ago off of seafood, right? Now, the story is that there was a natural climate shift happening in Africa around the same time, so the interior parts were too hot. So we think that was the first time that we got to the coast. Now, I love to, in my brain, do kind of an Einstein thought experiment and think about that tribe of hominids that have been living in the savannah, and it was too hot, so they're making their way in, and that day they push those bushes apart, and there's this big blue body of water. They probably thought it was fresh water at first. And they went down, and lo and behold, you can pick up clams. They're really highly nutritious food that you could, back in that time, you could probably grab fish out of the tide pools. There would have been plenty of fish. So we took up residence in these caves, and that's probably when we began to swim and dive. And, we're the only animal on the planet that can run a mile, swim a mile, climb a tree, and dive underwater like 30 or 40 feet. Now think about that. We are uniquely, I think.
That's a great point. I never thought about that.
Yeah, me neither.
Huh.
And I wonder if it wasn't that time along the coast 200,000 years ago where we developed this relationship, with the ocean. And I would argue that from that point forward, the ocean remained this goal. We always wanted to get out there. We wanted to get under it for curiosity, for food, for any number of reasons. And if you look back over history, there were all these attempts. Alexander the Great made a diving bell that lowered it underwater. Any coastal culture you go to that has a long history, continuous history, thousands of years, they have tremendous diving abilities. The Carib Indians, look in Japan, the Ama divers, at least 2,000 years, and they're always women, and they can dive down and they can collect seafood and whatnot. And then, as you say, there were the heavy diving gear, but it was when your grandfather invented the two-stage regulator that suddenly the guy down at the gas station that pumps gas could go down to Sears and buy a set of gear. And the ocean was finally accessible after all that time. And that was, I believe, your grandfather was in the French Navy, wasn't he?
He was in the French Navy. An interesting story about that background is my grandfather had a passion for flight. He wanted to be a pilot in the French Navy at the time. This is the 1930s. And when in fact, he really had no knowledge or interest in the ocean. And he had enrolled in the Naval Aviation Program and had a car accident not long afterwards, visiting friends, driving on the windy roads of southern France, and crashed his car and broke his back. And he was, because of that injury, actually eliminated from the Naval Aviation Program, which was a devastating occurrence for him, of course, because his dream was to fly. Now, I like to think of it as the most fortuitous car accident in history for two reasons.
Changed history.
Because it truly did change history, but also because every single member of his graduating class from the Naval Aviation Program was killed in the early days of World War II. And that was before my father was born. And so I literally wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that car accident. But we all very likely wouldn't be here having this conversation in the same way, because that car accident, he was washed out of the Naval Aviation Program. He was told to swim in the Mediterranean Ocean to rebuild his strength. And so a captain, a man named Philippe Cousteau, who my father was named after, and thus I'm named after, gave my grandfather a pair of homemade goggles to free dive with. And this love affair with the ocean began. But it also spawned a frustration. that my grandfather was frustrated by the limits of breath hold diving, 2, 3, 4 minutes you can spend underwater. And so he then set out to try and solve that problem. And when people think about my grandfather, they think about this lanky Frenchman with a red hat and a funny accent and a big nose, you know, who was an explorer and a poet and an author and a filmmaker and so many things. I like to think of him first and foremost as a problem solver. And that's really, I think, the legacy of Cousteau is of solving problems, because he saw a problem that he wanted to spend more time underwater. And you know what? He didn't let the fact that nothing existed deter him. He met and found and sought out an engineer who had invented this industrial valve that could take gases under pressure to ambient air pressure on demand. And they tinkered for years to try and shrink it down, put it on a tank, and could we breathe off of this underwater? And they did, and they changed the world. And the underwater cameras didn't exist, so he created them and worked with people to tinker and invent them. The small little submersibles that he was developing, so many techniques and tools and resources and ideas that really were about a response to a problem. And really in the beginning, what I think a lot of people don't realize is that my grandfather wasn't about conservation. There wasn't really this idea, as you know, Greg, of ocean conservation. Terrestrial conservation was still relatively a new concept that was beginning to take on around the world, but predominantly, you know, in the United States with national parks and the growth of our national park system. But oceans were still this place that we just pulled food out of and dumped trash into. And in the beginning, my grandfather was all about exploration. And it really wasn't until the early 1960s with my father that when he was a young man, that they were on expedition in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. And they were able to see with their own eyes the decline in the health of the Mediterranean that had just happened since the 1950s and the late 1940s. So, you know, post-World War II, in about 15, 20 years, the Mediterranean suffered a great deal. And they came back from that expedition. They said, this is no longer just about exploration. This is about conservation. They were seeing it disappear before their very eyes. And that ultimately, I think, became the biggest problem that he sought to solve, was how do we build a sustainable oceans? Because he recognizes, Ashlan so eloquently said, the oceans truly do unite us. Our food, our water, air, climate, and all those different issues that we all are so familiar with. But at the end of the day, it was really about problem solving.
He really was prescient on the environmental front, though. You and your father. I think it, as well known as the Cousteau name is connected with the ocean, I don't think it actually gets enough credit for pioneering the modern environmental movement. I think that it really was the voice, especially of your father, the combination of your father and your grandfather, those two, through the National Geographic, began to really blow the environmental horn way before anybody else was doing that. I've noticed that as I've looked at it, there's a documentary that came out, a French documentary about your father, basically. And I saw it on a Lufthansa flight.
It was a film. It was a feature film.
Feature film. Yeah. And they didn't have subtitles in it, or they didn't translate it. And I don't speak or understand French, but I didn't have to because I knew the story so well. and they really showed that, how your father started trumpeting the decline of the oceans in the late 60s, early 70s.
As is so often, it's always the younger generation, I think, that takes that innovation and builds off the shoulders of the past. But yeah, Ted Turner referred to my grandfather as the father of the environmental movement, and
I agree with that, and I'd like to see that acknowledgement pushed out there, more. Oddly enough, your grandfather is usually identified as an oceanographer, a marine biologist.
Yes, and yet he was the first one to always say that he was not. I mean, he was a naval captain,
he's a filmmaker.
And never took credit for being a scientist. He provided platforms for scientists.
Yeah.
But yes, people would often refer to, they often refer to me as an oceanographer, marine biologist, and I am also the first one to say, no, I actually have a master's degree in history. I'm not a scientist, but I seek to tell those stories. I'm a storyteller. But yeah, people tended to lump him, and that was an annoyance for him because he always said, you know, I didn't earn that title. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD. I'm not doing all those things, and I don't want credit for those things if I didn't do them. So he was the first one to correct people.
Well, one thing, I think people get a little too hung up sometimes on degrees. I always try to remind people that the first person that ever got a PhD got it from someone who didn't have a PhD.
That's right. That's right.
I'm a firm believer in the PhD equivalency in life.
I like that.
And I think certainly that both of you and the people, your father and grandfather, would fall in that category. But you know what? I wonder why. They sounded the horn, the clarion call, but then it feels like there was a big pause. Well, let's say I would say that your grandfather ushered in a doctrine, the age of the ocean. A whole paradigm opened up for us, because the ocean, as we sit here we can look at it where we're sitting, and it's a beautiful, opaque, serene interface. You can't see underwater. And therefore, we didn't know what was down there, the creatures, the giant squids, the sharks. I'd go so far as to say that the Cousteau family, started by your grandfather, carried on so ably by his children, and now you, ushered in the age of the ocean. This is sort of a doctrine where suddenly that opaque surface that we couldn't see under, it was revealed to us, and it came to us in stories, it came to us in films, it came to us in everyday people being able to go underwater and scuba dive. It started, it augmented modern oceanography. It started after that period. And also the environmental voice that was so strong, especially with your father. But then I would say there's been a pause. It's like the oceans got put off to the side while the world began to look after other things. Terrestrial conservation moved forward, and our awareness of forests, our awareness of agricultural practices, things like that. But the main driver of all life on Earth is the ocean. It's what makes this place a nice place to live, the ocean. It provides most of our oxygen. It provides food. The oceans are the main driver of life on Earth. We know that. It's been established scientifically, stabilizes climate. Most of the oxygen we're breathing right now is from the ocean. A billion people get their daily protein from the ocean every day, and it's a very high-quality source of protein. We'd be in a very bad way without an ocean. As a matter of fact, you've got plenty of examples in our own solar system of what life would be like here without an ocean. Yet, there was a pause in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s. The oceans continued a very precipitous state of decline, from overfishing, coastal development wiped out coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass communities, a very, very bad state of affairs. And then there's been an awareness has popped, I feel, in the last 10 years or so, and I call it the ocean renaissance, where we've beginning to take the lessons learned from the days of your grandfather and take modern science and really begin to, now we know the problem, we've started some solutions, but we haven't solved the problem by any means. The very best, I think we've slowed the rate of decline in ocean health, but it's still on the downturn. And I wonder, why is that? Why have we not woken up earlier to how important the oceans are? I mean, remember when the famous picture of Earthrise over the moon, Bill Anders, the astronaut, took that picture, and it was blue. You would have thought, hey, there's something there. And then Voyager, the famous Voyager unmanned spacecraft, when it was just about to leave the gravitational influence of the sun, Carl Sagan talked the engineers at NASA to turn the spacecraft around and take one last picture of Earth. And it was far in the distance. It was just one pixel in the camera they had in those days. And that pixel was blue. Still, we didn't get it. But finally, I feel like we've turned that corner. Why has there been this big pause? Why, was it because your father passed away and Cousteau died? We didn't have that voice, that storytelling voice? And more importantly, what is it going forward? I mean, I'm looking for your guidance, for your wisdom, because it's imperative the Earth, we Earthlings on this spaceship, so eloquently described by Buckminster Fuller, everything we've ever had, everything we ever will have is on the Earth right now. And the main thing on this spacecraft, this spaceship Earth, is the ocean, and we got to take care of it. So what happened and what needs to happen into the future?
Well, I just want to say one thing real quick. I think one of the issues is out of sight, out of mind. Right? People have a really hard time relating to the ocean and the things in it. We understand trees, we're surrounded by them. We see, the terrestrial landscape, I think, is easier for people to connect to. And so, yes, I think my father's passing did actually have an impact. I know it had an impact on my grandfather's work, and a lot of his work declined through the 80s. My father died in 1979. But, you know, there are many other people out there with an incredible voice, incredible leadership. But the storytelling, I think, has been lacking. Really effective storytelling in the last few decades.
You know, I think that what happens in the ocean a lot of times is you can't really see it. If the things that we are doing to our ocean on a daily basis happened on land, people would be absolutely outraged. If you take trawling,
Yep.
right? Take trawling, for instance. They go in with a big, giant scooper. They drag it on the bottom floor. They kill everything from corals to turtles to fish to this. I mean, the bycatch is sometimes 10, 100-fold. If that happened on land, people would be outraged. If to get chicken for dinner, you went out and you killed every single squirrel, bird, rodent, lizard, snake within a couple 100 feet.
It's almost like cutting down the forest for a squirrel, right?
Exactly.
Is that what it's like? Yeah,
People would lose their shit.
Yeah.
Excuse my language.
That's right.
But people would lose their shit. And the fact that that is what happens every single day for shrimp out on the ocean, and then people that just don't think about it.
We know a lot of ocean lovers and advocates and animal rights people who love shrimp and don't realize that, like, it's the most unsustainable fishery out there. And for every pound of shrimp that's caught, you're killing, as Ashlan said, sharks and crabs, and it's number one killer of dolphins in the Gulf of Mexico, and sea turtles, and on and on and on and on. And you'd never get away with doing what you do in the ocean on land. That's a great point, and it's out of sight, out of mind. And so then the challenge is, how do we do a better job of storytelling? My father and grandfather were such great storytellers. But I think still one of our big challenges in the environmental movement is, you know, there's an amateurness to this storytelling. That we forget the number one rule of communications, which is know your audience and speak to your audience.
Right.
I think so often in the environmental movement, because we have real passion and dedication and authenticity around really caring for these issues, but maybe not very sophisticated communications training.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what we end up doing is we talk about what we care about.
Right.
I do a TEDx talk, or I did a TEDx talk, and so did Ashlan, actually from Antarctica, in last January. But I did one in Washington D.C. and I threw up a photograph of a polar bear, and I asked, how many of you, when you think about climate change in the audience, you think of this? And everybody raised their hands. That's kind of the poster child of climate change, polar bears. And then I showed a picture of a little baby girl, and I said, okay, how many of you think about this when you think about climate change? And half a dozen people raised their hand. And I think that's the big challenge that we face in the environmental movement, is that we've done a very poor job of really connecting the dots to the types of motivations that matter to people. And Ashlan mentioned this earlier, and this is really important. I want to talk more about this, but this idea of how do we reach the converted? We are really, 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 really good at talking to the 10 or 20% of the public that already agrees with us.
Yep.
We're really, really, really not good at connecting to people who don't agree with us, or who don't have that perspective and relativity of understanding and caring about the oceans. Not enough people care about polar bears, clearly, to make climate change an issue that affects voters. There was not one single conversation or question about climate change in the presidential debates in the last election. So it's not an issue that's resonating. Oceans are not an issue that's resonating. And I think we as a community have to take part of the blame for that.
Yeah.
Well, and when Philippe talks about his grandfather, Jaques, as being an inventor, I think of him as a storyteller. And when I think of television and what the undersea world of Jaques Cousteau was in its actual form, when you break it down, it was the world's first reality show. It was a reality show. You went on that adventure, yes, because it was fun and you were going to cool places and things like that, but you watched because you wanted to see the cute men.
It wasn't scripted,
It wasn't scripted. They had little red hats on. They would smoke underwater. They would always
drink wine underwater, too.
Exactly.
Conch shelf, they did, yeah.
You wanted that experience. You wanted to be part of the crew.
So
for me, when I was in Antarctica, you know, my speech and kind of this whole idea, and that's what I bring to this partnership, this marriage, this relationship that we have, from a business standpoint, is how can we make saving the world more entertaining?
Yeah.
And you can do that in a bunch of different ways. You know, obviously there is a space for those hardcore docs that are very doom and gloom. People will sit down and watch those, they'll get very upset, and some of them will go on to take action. But a lot of people won't even sit down and watch that film. Because they don't agree with it, or because it's going to be too sad, or it's like the people that still eat meat but they don't want to know about where their meat comes from. That's how their brain works. And you know what? Instead of telling them that that's wrong, I want to say, well, let's look at this argument from a different way. Or not argument, but let's try to approach you from a different angle. So, for instance, Jaques' show was an amazing show that was a reality show. Like, how can we Kim Kardashian the shit out of our ocean? That's what I want to do. And when we can do that, and we can make these stories interesting, and when we can reach out to the general public, to people that don't vote like we vote, to people completely across the other side of the aisle, that, their jobs are completely different, we need to talk to them, and we need to talk to them about what they care about. We need to talk to them about, putting food on their table, for having healthy kids. We need to find touch points, and we need to diversify. So we're always trying to, how can we diversify the people that we're talking to and make these stories interesting to them so that they seek it out?
And I think I say we, because I'm an environmental scientist, get a little preachy sometimes. And I think I try to avoid that. And I think it is about storytelling. It's about bringing the ocean into our minds, into the consciousness. And it's very controversial, but I believe that Jaws, the movie Jaws, was actually, on balance, good for the oceans. And the reason I believe that is because it brought, for the first time, oceans up on the big screen. It got people thinking about the oceans. In fact, one of the reasons I'm an oceanographer is because I wanted to be Matt Hooper. I saw this cool guy up there on the screen. He had a beard, he wore blue jeans, he was funny, he liked to drink wine. I mean, it was like a role model. And you could have portrayed, that was the first time an oceanographer was portrayed in the popular media. He could have had a white lab coat on with thick glasses.
He was a cool dude.
But he was a cool dude. And that led me to want to become an oceanographer. I had no interest at all in ocean conservation until later, when I saw how bad things were out there. In fact, I saw one of the turning points in my career was in the early 1990s. I was in a submarine diving off between Korea and Japan, in the Sea of Japan, and we went down 18,000 feet. And it took us 3 hours to sink down that deep, and we were exploring the life around this epicenter of an earthquake that had just occurred. We were looking at what it did it killed all the animals because of the shock waves and injected some toxic gas fluids out of the earth. But when I got down there, I saw plastic everywhere.
Oh.
Now, here's a place that hadn't seen the light of day for billions of years, and I know no one had been there. We were the first ones to go there, and it had already been spoiled. Now, that's when I turned my scientific career into one that was focused on finding ways for us to get along with the ocean. I like to describe my work as finding ways for the modern world and the ocean to coexist and support each other in the modern world. So back to Jaws, I think that it injected oceans for the first time, I think, in a big way. I mean, of course, there have been other movies about the ocean, but that was the first big blockbuster, and it got people thinking about it. Now, it didn't have a conservation ethic in it, but I think that was its eloquent perfection. Instead, it got you interested in the ocean. And I know a lot of shark biologists that are shark biologists today because of that movie. I know several very accomplished, Brian Scarry, one of the great underwater photographers of our day.
Yeah, Brian, pretty great guy.
Yeah, he's a good friend of ours. And he brings the ocean to us as a journalist for the conservation of the ocean. And it was because of Jaws that he got interested in the ocean. So I'm not promoting another movie about a shark, a demonic shark that takes over a resort community by any means, but I'm saying that we need to be broad-minded about how we tell the stories and what the stories are.
And and I think, Ashlan said it so well. You need Kim Kardashian in the oceans. I mean, what that means is really thinking about, okay, because when my grandfather made the undersea world of Jaques Cousteau in the 60s and 70s, I think what was really fundamentally different about the media landscape is that your audience came to you, right? Because there were half a dozen channels on television, and that was, when you had a show on Sunday nights, man, you could have 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 million people watching it.
Yeah,
and around the world, that was also the case. There were very few television channels. And so you had your audience coming to you. But now it's even more imperative. And as we've seen cable grow and the diversity of choice grow in terms of the media that exists, as Ashlan said, we need to do a better job of diversifying how we tell those stories for different types of audiences. As you pointed out, there's the approach. We need to be unscripted. We need to be in reality television. We need to be looking at all of these means to reach a broad audience of people and get them engaged and excited. But we don't do that as a community. We still focus on the odd ocean documentary that will be great to, again, mobilize the converted, but that's a small segment of the population. And so I think we need to challenge ourselves, and that's what we try and do in our media work, to think outside the box and to diversify our message and not just fall back on the old way of doing things, because it's a vastly different world than it was just a few decades ago in terms of storytelling and media.
So what do we do with this moment? I mean, I think storytelling is how we get the message across. That's the first solution to any problem is becoming aware of the problem, right? So we're aware of the problem. And both of you do a great job at that in person, and I know I see it in your TV and your documentary work. Okay, how does that then lead to change? And what should that change be?
Ooh.
Well, I think there's two issues here. When we talk about storytelling, we're talking about the importance of broadening the audience of people that are aware of these issues and are exposed to them. But that is one prong, I believe, of a two-pronged attack, and is very much embedded in the work that we do, which is the education piece. Right. And that's the other place that we've fallen down in the environmental movement. We tend to focus on short-term technological and legislative fixes to problems. What we're not doing is, as we said, growing a constituency of people and the social growth and social movement. I can count the amount of foundations and groups that fund education on one hand.
Yeah.
We have underinvested in education in this country and in the environmental movement. You still talk to a lot of the old school kind of conservation organizations. They don't invest in conservation or education at all. And the problem then is that we're not seeding and growing a movement of growing a constituents.
Yeah.
We need more constituents who vote for the ocean. We need more constituents who buy the ocean. We need people to be spending and changing their behavior. It's very hard to get an adult to change their behavior. We've done a lot of documentaries. Honestly, and I've been a part of PSA campaigns and all this great stuff. And that's great. It mobilizes the converted and kind of keeps the army focused and motivated. But I have never had someone come up to me who was not already an ocean advocate, didn't believe in climate change, etc., and came up to me and said, wow, that 30-second public service announcement, man, that knocked my socks off and changed my worldview completely. That doesn't happen. It's very hard to change people's perspective, right? But I have had so many adults come up to me and say, we founded one of the leading youth environmental education organizations here in the US, Earth Echo International, 15 years ago to address this. And I've had so many adults come up to me and be like, because of the education programs you have in classrooms, my kids are coming home to me and nagging me that we have to start recycling, that we need to do renewable energy, that we should get electric cars, that I need to vote differently and care about the environment. And I had no idea about food and meat and X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Kids are our greatest tool. Young people are our greatest tool, not only to prime them to change their behavior and care about these issues as they grow up, but they're our greatest warrior at home because of the influence that they have on parents. And so we have missed a tremendous opportunity over the last few decades by ignoring essentially as the environmental movement education and investment in education, because that is how you grow a constituency, I firmly believe. So you need to have the good storytelling that can capture people's imaginations, get them excited, reach disparate audiences with different means of telling story, but you also need to follow that up with education and focus on young people so that they can then both grow up to be ocean advocates, but can also influence the adults and the people in their communities to be ocean advocates. That's the only way that we grow a constituency, and then we don't have to fight the legislative battles to protect. I mean, can you imagine? Who would have thought we'd be fighting to protect the Endangered Species Act? I mean, Greg, it's lunacy. Yeah. But we're fighting these political battles now because we have not invested in growing a constituency of environmental advocates in this country.
And the information's got to be good information too. It's got to be honest. It's got to be scientifically accurate. And I know that you do work with Shark Week with Discovery, as do I. And I'll tell you a story. When they first asked me to do, I've been hosting a program, being a major host of alien sharks of the deep over the last 6 or 7 years. And when they first asked me to do it, I said no.
Yeah.
And they had never had anybody say no to them, and because it was the most popular week in all of TV programming, I think. And they said, why? And I said, well, because you stretch the truth. You amongst the scientific community, you make people think there's megalodons alive still, and that you also stimulate fear of sharks in the population. And I don't really want to be part of that. And they said, well, gosh. And I said, well, I'll do it under two conditions. I said, if you stick to the facts, and if you don't try to make me say that sharks are dangerous or that I'm afraid of them. And they kind of went, well, all right. And I said, and if you do this, I said, I guarantee you we're gonna have a better show than if you didn't, because I had great material. It was deep sea sharks, right? So it's alien sharks of the deep. The first episode we filmed in Japan, and there was a juvenile sperm whale died naturally, and a local scientist had put it in a freezer, big freezer, and
really big freezer.
and we dragged this thing down to 2,000 feet, and we anchored it, and then we had 3 submarines, and we sat down and just watched the first phases of the whale fall ecology. You know, there's a whole ecology around dead whales on the seafloor, because whales have been dying and falling to the seafloor for millions of years, and various forms of life have evolved to live on the dead carcass, which will actually provide nutrition for many decades because of the slow decay of the oils in the bones. So we went down there and we saw the hagfish come in and the 6-gill sharks tearing this thing apart, and it was a fascinating program. And then we laid in goblin sharks. I mean,
oh, goblin sharks, yeah.
I mean, that looks like the guy that used to hide under my bed when I was about 9 years old.
Totally.
You know, I mean, and so we had a fact-filled program about deep sea sharks. Nothing was made up, and I think they said it was one of their most popular programs that year. So we had a very. They did try to make me one time. They were trying to get me, like, to exhibit some fear. They said, so Dr. Stone, what would it be like? How would you feel? What would the shark do if you were in the water with a goblin shark? You know, and I said, well, I'd be very interested, but the problem is the shark would swim away from me because it would be scared of me. You know, so I think it's important we get the messaging right. We get it accurate. If we don't get it accurate in this day and age with social media, you're toast, man. If you don't have the facts correct. And then the part that tends to be the yawner and puts people to sleep is the public policy. That public policy, all it is a system of rules that we as a community agree on of how we're going to behave in large numbers. And in the old days in Africa, it was, 100,000 years ago, it was 60 of us sitting around a campfire every night talking about what was right and what was wrong. Well, today it's millions of people, billions of people trying to make cohesive decisions together. And I'll say there's been some progress there. California just banned plastic straws. Now that may sound like a minor win, but I'm very happy about that. I mean, here you have a straw that you use it for all of 2 minutes, and then it's around for hundreds, maybe thousands of years as a piece of garbage that can be ingested by birds or cause all kinds of havoc. And the UN has recently come awake on the ocean through some the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's a few other things that are happening. So I'm encouraged by this confluence of, on the one hand, I think we're beginning to see the results of the fantastic storytelling that's happened here and there over the years, starting with the undersea world of Jaques Cousteau. And then scuba got us underwater. Then scuba gear enabled a whole generation to take their cameras underwater. And suddenly, bam, all the magazines are full of underwater pictures. And now the world has opened up to, okay, the oceans are important, we'll make some decisions about not trashing it. But, I would say it's not enough by any means.
No, it's not, because when you think about the SDGs, you bring the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, the oceans is like one of them.
Yeah.
And there's 17? There's way too many of them. Again, communications 101, that the UN doesn't always do a terrific job. I'm a big fan of the UN, but too many. Sometimes they have a big issue with communications. But the oceans is one of them, and
we had to fight for that.
We had to fight for that.
Yeah.
And at the top of the list are things about feeding people and poverty reduction and and hunger reduction and all these other issues. And yet what astounds me is that if we don't get the ocean right, we are going to be unable to do any of those things.
Well, and I think another thing that is very important, especially in storytelling, is connecting the dots for people. Philippe doesn't eat seafood. Never really has. I have recently stopped eating seafood, and I can't tell you how many times I have the conversation when people say, well, why do you not eat seafood? Are they your friends? And I was like, well, yes. I said, but, our seafood right now is really starting to be full of plastics. So for me, I had friends that were like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do plastic straws. They didn't know why they weren't doing plastic straws, but they jumped on the bandwagon, which was awesome. But we need to do a better job by telling people, hey, one of the reasons why we're getting rid of plastic straws, especially in California because we live right on the ocean, is that plastic is making its way into our waterways, ultimately making it into the ocean, and then it's just getting into the entire ecosystem out there. And so I think as storytelling, you have to also point out to people, follow the dots for them, or so they can follow the dots and kind of figure out why these things are affecting them personally. Because then I can't tell you, now people are like, oh, really? And I said, yeah, you should look at the whale recently that just washed up and how much plastic it was in it. And they are technically, when whales die now, they are a biohazard because they're so full of so many toxins. And then people say, oh, well, that's crazy. And I say, well, that's also why we should be banning a little bit more of the single-use plastic. And then when you close that loop for people, they have that aha moment and say, oh, so that plastic straw is actually affecting me when I, quote unquote, throw it away.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, and we got to take it to the next level. I look back, I do these thought, I look back in history and I say, okay, when there were big changes in the world, when things really turned a corner, what drove it, and how did we behave to get there? And a good one is World War II. We still look back at that as a moral compass, as a turning point for ultimately the better, although horrendous things happened during that time. And at the beginning of the war, the United States President FDR, Roosevelt, called all the car manufacturers to Washington, D.C., got them in a room with the Secretary of Defense, and he said, okay, guys, we're going to need, 10,000 tanks every 6 months. We're going to need 25,000 Jeeps. He gave them a shopping list of things that they needed for the war effort. And all the car manufacturers, they said, oh, Mr. President, I'm very sorry, we can't do this. And he said, well, why not? He says, well, if we do that, we can't make cars. And he said, oh, you don't understand, do you? You're not going to make cars anymore. And if you look back, there were no cars made, by and large, during the war. Right. All production was thrown at the problem at hand, which was to win the war. And we're still making cars, and when it comes to our attention to the oceans and to the environment.
That's a great
analogy.
That's a great analogy. We're still making cars, people.
We have to drop everything and pay attention to this, because otherwise we're going down the toilet.
Well, and I think Ashlan made a great point about this idea, when you talk about health, for example, with microplastics. But then, there are other things. I was giving a speech to folks in the oil and gas industry a few years ago, and I, instead of trying to rail on about climate change, I just said, how many of you have family or friends who are in the military? And quite a few of them raised their hands. And I said, well, let's talk about that then. 1 out of 8 casualties in the war in Iraq were escorting fuel convoys.
Really? Huh.
The oil dependency on oil is one of the DoD's, Department of Defense's, most hated dependencies. It's their #1 line item. Cost is oil. They're big investors in renewable energy. So can we get beyond this partisan infighting around climate change, and can we all agree that providing our warfighters with the best tools and equipment is the best way to go?
That's a good approach.
And the audience was very in agreement with that. And so when Ashlan talks about some people are really motivated by health, there are other people motivated by security. That's what we need to do a better job. That's a great example of how we do a better job of understanding the motivations and what our public and our audience is interested in. I like to tell a story about, you're familiar with this, Greg, the piracy in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, and this is actually a case study that the Department of Defense now uses to teach Marines about environmental issues. Because a friend of ours is a Marine, and he sent it to me, and he's like, oh my God, this is what you always talk about. And essentially, a few decades ago, illegal fishing off the Somali coast by Europe, China, Russia, caused fishermen to arm themselves to try and protect their historical fisheries. And they ended up hijacking some of those fishing boats, and they got a lot of money in ransom to return those boats, and the light bulb went off. And all of a sudden, you started to then get non-state actors like Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb and Al-Shabaab and these other groups that started to get involved in the piracy issue and the hijacking of these boats, because there was millions of dollars at stake. And so, as the summarized in this one article I was reading, that's part of the DoD's report, a few $1 million worth of fisheries conservation could have avoided the piracy crisis, which now today costs the global economy somewhere between $80 to $100 billion in direct costs for interdiction, costs tens of billions in trade. It has led to the rise of terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda, and we don't need to talk about how that affects all of us. And directly, you know, Al-Shabaab just had another car bombing a few months ago that killed 200 innocent people. So
Philippe, you are so dead right on this. Yeah,
we need to connect those dots, as Ashlan says.
You know,
that we do a better job of connecting.
and we
dots.
did that. You know, but for the listeners, I was the chief ocean scientist at Conservation International for 10 years, and we were trying to get audiences with the Congress on environmental issues, and we were getting sent to sort of mid-level, low-level staff members whenever we put in a request. Until we had two great ideas. The first one was we started bringing celebrities with us.
Always helps.
Always helps. Harrison Ford, love Harrison. He's a trustee at Conservation International. And when we said, we'd like to come talk to you about the oceans, and Harrison Ford's going to be with us, everybody said, "Come." We even got to see Hillary Clinton. She was the foreign minister at the time. But the other thing we did is we said we want to come and talk to you about national security. And we got John McCain.
They're in.
And they're in. And it's not a political issue. It's a bipartisan issue when you discuss it in terms of the security of the nation. And I loved your connecting it with the military operations, Philippe. That's absolutely true, and it's absolutely brilliant. I hadn't really heard anybody with that kind of an expose on that. Another little comment on the Congress. There's a bipartisan group called the Conservation Caucus organization, and they have an annual event.
ICCF, yeah, we know them.
Yep, ICCF. And they reached out to me one year and they said, "Greg, can you get us a speaker for the oceans?" And they said gave me some requirements. A, they have to really know their subject. B, they have to be a good speaker. And C, they have to be a Republican. And I said, "I got just the guy for you." And it's my good friend Bill Wrigley, who at the time was a trustee at CI and co-developed the Ocean Health Index with me. I said, "This guy's great. He's a free market Republican. He's very passionate, very knowledgeable about the ocean." So a couple of days before the event, they said, "Well, can we see Mr. Wrigley's presentation?" So I said, "Sure." So I popped him the PDF of it, and I got this frantic phone call late Sunday night for, I think it was a Monday night or a Tuesday dinner. I said, Greg, he can't give this talk." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because on slide 12, he says the United States needs to ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty." And he said, "That's too controversial." And I said, "What do you mean it's too controversial?" I said, "We're one of 2 countries in the world that hasn't ratified it, and the U.S. military has a strong position."
I believe every administration, Republican and Democrat, has wanted to ratify it. Bush's and all of them. It's just been a few
it gets hung up because of there's a group that thinks the UN is too strong in world affairs, and I'm not passing judgment on them or anything, but it's just the way it is. So I said to the guy I said, "Listen," I said, "the days of the Soviet Union are over. You can't invite somebody to give a talk and then tell them what to say." So Bill Wrigley gave this brilliant talk. We had top senators and congressmen there, and at that slide there was a standing ovation. It was like the best moment of bringing that home. I think to the listeners, it sounds like a complicated subject matter, and it is. The ocean's big, it's vast. We still haven't even explored large portions of it. I think we've visited maybe, I think the figure's up 6, 7, 8% of the seafloor. We actually have better maps of the surface of Venus and Mars and the backside of the moon than we do of our own ocean. So there's a lot of mystery out there, which is part of why we're in the game, right? We enjoy that, the dives and exotic locations and Antarctica and all that. He was able to...
He was such a unique, incredible guy. And then at a unique, specific time in history, too. I think it's going to be a chorus of us that are out there because, as I said, he commanded an audience of tens of millions with one documentary television show. That doesn't happen anymore. And so we
doesn't? You don't get that kind of audience now?
That's we wish.
What's a good audience for a show?
I mean, the top shows on television, like.
I mean, even the Super Bowl didn't get that. They're lucky if they get.
Oh, is that right? It's
5 million.
It's an abundance of riches. There's too many options.
I wonder what the Super Bowl. I think it might be more than that, but I think it was American Idol. I was reading one day. It was like 20 million or something like that. Is a great night for them, and that's like.
And that used to be regular ratings back in the day.
Yeah. So
back in the day of ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Yeah.
That's it.
So it's just a different media landscape, and. What as you pointed out, what was so exciting and what's been so amazing about what Ashlan brings to the table in our professional career is this perspective and diversity of storytelling and thinking about how do you reach a different audience and what appeals to a different audience.
Yeah.
We all need to do a better job, I think, and for those funders out there, for those nonprofit types out there, we need to take communications more seriously, and we need to invest in communications a lot more.
Yeah.
It's always the afterthought. It's really I've never seen many organizations. I've rarely seen an organization write a grant check to do better communications. It's all about publishing papers and doing the science, and all of that's really important. But if we don't have
hear that,
a
everybody
public that cares, then it's all a waste of investment.
Ashlan and Philippe are great stewards of this mantle, and a very good way to support this communication.
Well, and yourself as well. I mean, great.
Well,
as a scientist, you've truly been one of the great scientific storytellers, communicators, and because there's not a lot of them out there that are able to do both. That takes
because it takes
a renaissance.
it's two different parts of your brain, and that's actually when people come up after we give speeches and they say, well, what can we do? I'm a scientist and I'm working on this, and I say, continue your work and figure out a way to break through the noise. Your work is amazing, and you have to also think, okay, now how am I going to get it out? Because nobody's going to sit down and just read a regular old scientific report. But if you can figure out a way to get a hook, if you can figure out a way to make it so people can relate it to their everyday life, that's when people get excited, and that's when the real change can happen.
Yeah. Hey, here's a softball. What's your favorite ocean animal, Ashlan? And why?
That's so hard.
Well, one of your favorite. I know. I always say I hate to pick it.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
I know, that is a hard one.
Oh my gosh, there's like 8,000 going through my head. Can I pick two?
Yeah, pick two.
Okay, I love orcas just because they're so amazing, and they just,
AKA killer whale.
AKA killer whales. Because they're also like the king of the ocean, because in a fight between a killer whale and a great white, the killer whale wins.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is just incredible. But also I love Goliath groupers. We were able to swim with a few during the filming of our last show, Caribbean Pirate Treasure. Actually, we had a couple, and they are so friendly. They are the golden retrievers of the ocean, and I will never, ever, ever eat grouper, because they literally just come up to you and they want to meet you.
They have personality,
and they have personalities, and I have gotten 2 tours from 2 separate groupers that wanted to show me their reef and their house, and they come up and they almost nudge you, and then they're like, hey, come on, lady, follow me.
It's awesome.
And you follow them around.
Teddy Tucker and I used to go out to this reef in Bermuda every year. It was a shipwreck called the Tombstone Wreck, and we got to know the fish year after year, the same fish, because you can actually identify them. You take pictures of the patterns on the outside, and they would come over and hang out with us. And one year I started looking at the pictures, and I said, Teddy, it's the same fish as last year.
It's the same dude.
It wasn't a Goliath grouper, but it was a grouper. Yeah. What about you, Philippe?
I love octopus. They are so amazing. This enigmatic, brilliantly for an invertebrate, the most intelligent invertebrate in the world, and the fact that they can change color and change texture, and they have this this level of intelligence that's been proven over and over, and they're just like, if there's an alien on Earth, I think it's an octopus. They're just so fascinating.
We are not alone.
No, we are not alone. I tell you, thank God they're as small as they are, because otherwise they would roll everything. So I would have to pick an octopus, and then maybe second, maybe I've got something for weird looking animals. I love hammerhead sharks. They're just the great hammerheads that we were diving with in Bimini.
Incredible.
They're just so weird looking up close, but fascinating as well.
An octopus, when I worked at the New England Aquarium, they used to climb out of their tanks. They'd shimmy up the pipes and over into another tank and eat stuff, and then they'd shimmy up back on the pipes and go back in.
Yeah.
And it took us a while to figure out what was going on, but we were seeing like dead animals in one tank, and we're like, what happened last night? And then we figured out we had to make a lid on top of the thing. Everybody said, oh, they're so smart. And I said, well, if they're really smart, they would have put the crab shells in the penguin tray. but we did figure them out, Something just occurred to me, just circling back to our previous conversation, and that punch through. I think you said it, Ashlan. How do we punch through the noise? And that's one challenge that Your grandfather didn't have so much because there wasn't a lot of noise. He had the great challenge of, making noise, just period. But I know that you worked with Steve Irwin, and he was good at punching through that noise, And he also was good at getting a message across that wasn't preachy at all. It was exciting. He was controversial, but that was part of his appeal. He was also I never had the honor of meeting him. I followed in his tracks once in Fiji. I did a shark dive there. They had a shark feeding dive. You done that in Banga Lagoon?
You just did it.
Yeah.
You did that, yeah. Well, he had done it like a few months before I was there, and somebody said, yeah, he just came with one guy. He had a camera guy, was this camera guy, sound guy, producer, grip, everything, and him. I don't know, but you worked with him for a while, didn't you?
I did. We did a show called Ocean's Deadliest together, actually, and it was actually when the circumstances when he was killed by stingray.
Oh.
While we were filming. But he was a terrific guy, one of a kind, so enthusiastic, so warm, so friendly. Only slightly less enthusiastic in real life than he was on camera.
Really?
And he was just so much fun to be around. And Steve, they figured out a terrific formula, and he was the right personality for that show, and it inspired so many people to love the environment, at large.
And care about animals that aren't necessarily cuddly and cute.
Yeah.
I mean, people really loved crocodiles because of him. I mean, they really, it was like a PR makeover for crocodiles with Steve Irwin. It was incredible.
What did you think of that dive? That if you did that same, he did that dive, I did that dive, you did that dive. Just for the listeners, it's a dive where it's a commercial operation, and they bring down a 55-gallon barrel of frozen dead fish to 90 feet. I remember that. And there's a coral stone wall that goes up about 3 feet, and that's it. And the tourists have to stand on one side of the stone wall, and the guy starts to feed sharks. And we had bull sharks, we had tiger sharks, we had a lot of gray reef sharks, all coming in to feed. And it actually, they had to encourage the sharks to come in. They didn't get into a feeding frenzy. It was more like trying to get them to come. I thought it was a very dangerous kind of an operation, actually, because they were operating at a pretty deep depth. And one day, I think, some tourist's going to get bitten on that dive. I don't know. What did you think?
I'm torn with the shark feeding scenario. It's a challenge because what's the lesser evils? Or the lesser evil, I should say. When you look at the shark feeding operations, that's bringing income into tourist communities, whereas they might otherwise fish for the sharks. And so it's a complicated issue. I think it varies from operation to operation. The operation that we were out with, they actually invest a lot of money back into the community to pay them not to fish sharks. They also police a shark MPA that's been established in the area that they advocated for, and they were doing long-term research on any behavioral impacts of feeding the sharks. And so they, I think, are good stewards there in that they're investing in the education, and they have a talk to all their divers ahead of time before they get in the water about the sharks, why they're important, the research that they're doing, where their money's going, why it's supporting the local community and local fishermen. So I think it can be a really great tool. And then there are some other operations that are pretty exploitative and not great. So
I agree. I think we have to be broad-minded about these things. That if the net impact, the net effect is positive on the shark populations of, let's say, the South Pacific or Fiji writ large, that feeding, or I guess the scientific term is provisioning the animals, the downsides are that when you start to introduce food that's not part of the natural system, they begin to depend on that food. And if they don't get it, then you could potentially be throwing the ecosystem out of whack. And there are places where dolphins are fed in the wild as well, also highly controversial. But I think as we continue to grow and inhabit this planet in the way that we are, we need to
for future generations.
For future generations, and here's our next guest. I think you have to. I almost look at these animals like ambassadors.
100%.
The ones that are either in an aquarium. That's another area. Is it okay to have captive animals in an aquarium? Well, hell yeah. I mean, that's how another driver in my youth was the New England Aquarium, the first major aquarium in the world that brought a big tank and the ecosystem into the inner city. Those animals, they're wild animals. You capture them and you put them on display, and some people don't like that, but otherwise, those inner city kids are never going to get a chance to see what a Goliath grouper looks like, or
Mm-hmm.
a penguin or something. And hopefully their exposure to an animal and the beauty and the mystery will impact how they see themselves in the context of the earth and the ocean system. So, you know, and that the whole world, you know, the developing countries and the least developed countries and the developed countries, you know, the ethic today, one of the really important tools we have to save the oceans, of course, is to create marine protected areas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it makes sense. You know, the United States created the first park on land in Yellowstone, early part of the 20th century, and it was created by one of our presidents who liked to hunt. And his idea was, let's protect them so I can go out and shoot them, you know. And that's okay. It protected them.
Technically, Yellowstone was
1915 or something?
No. It was 18. It was when Grant was president. He established the initial.
Oh, it was Grant, right?
It was President Grant, so 1860s, I think, technically 1870. Anyway, I would say latter 19th century.
Okay,
President Grant established it.
Thank you.
It was Roosevelt who did like Yosemite and those kinds of
more
places in the
widespread.
teens.
Okay,
But
okay, thank
technically,
you.
Yellowstone was from the late 1800s.
Yeah, oh, is that right? Okay, so Yellowstone was the late 18th, and then Roosevelt. You know, the idea of protecting, creating parks, creating reserves started on land in the United States, and now we're beginning to apply it in the ocean, and it's a great tool, and I've been involved in it part of my career. But we've got to do it with very carefully, especially in parts of the world where poor nations are depending on the ocean for their daily food, because there's a tendency for some of our Western values and our Western ethics to be imposed on countries that don't have the same options that we have. They don't have the same economic systems that we have. They can't go to the store and buy stuff. Their refrigerator is the ocean,
Yep.
and they don't have a refrigerator, literally. And in order to have fresh food, they go into the ocean every day and get it. And when you come in and say, okay, we're going to shut this whole area down and let it go back to wilderness because that's what we want to have happen, and the ocean's in trouble and this has to happen, that doesn't work everywhere. So I think there's a new philosophy, a new system coming up, which is it's integrated, right? You have to accommodate the people that live there.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are now part of the ocean ecosystem. We've been around long enough now that we have to kind of realize that we're part of it, and we have to accommodate the needs of local people. I think the areas where you really do need to drill down on are the industrial scale fishing, you know, with the draggers
Yeah.
you were talking about earlier. But even the word marine protected area, it rings a bad tone in certain countries. So I've started to use things like regeneration zones, fish factories. And that goes, wow, we want one of those. You know?
Listen, nomenclature matters.
I want
Language
a fish
matters.
factory.
Yeah. Language matters, and I think it's this recognition of what we've been talking about, right? For this conversation is that the oceans connect all of us, and we need to meet those needs, but not deplete those needs, and recognize that human beings are part of that system.
Exactly.
An integral part of that system, and a dependent part of that system. In order to build the kind of world that we all
Very well put.
dream of.
And I think that might be a good way for us to bring our ship to shore and throw the lines on the dock. We've had a nice cruise of us here, and we're all sort of at various points in our scuba tank of life. You know,
That's right.
You're about maybe halfway through your tank. I'm a little bit ahead of you there, and
We got a long way to go.
We got a long way
All
to
of
go.
us.
We're going to do some more diving, and I'd like to end with another quote. I love quotes, and it's from a book that I'm gonna give you and Ashlan. It's an antique book
Oh my
about
goodness.
the
gosh.
ocean, and it's one of my favorite books, written in the 1860s.
Wow.
It's called The Water World, and it's pretty much what was known about the oceans at that time. There's nice illustrations in it, but the quote that I love from that is about the deep sea, right? And the guy has a quote in there. He says, now this is the ocean. Now think about it. Back in the late 1800s, where we actually knew absolutely nothing about it.
They knew it was blue.
They knew it was blue, and they knew when you went down, it was a mystery world. Every once in a while, some strange creature would wash up or something. And he calls it a world of wonder, where creation seems no more the works of nature, but her dreams.
That is beautiful. I love that.
I feel like that's what the movie Avatar was based on.
Yeah. All dreams.
My dear friends, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Greg.
And,
Thanks for having us.
We'll
This has been
do many
wonderful.
good things. All right. Thank you.